Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. We're going to give folks a minute to get settled. Really appreciate y'all tuning in. My name is Anna Viescamani. We're really grateful that you've taken the time on this busy, busy, busy week to tune in with us and be a part of this conversation as we enter the future together. And so I really appreciate everyone being a part of this. We're to give folks a minute or two just to get settled. We had over 1,600 RSVPs for this event tonight. And so I do want to make sure that we give folks a minute to get settled. You might notice that this is a webinar format. It's not typically my style for Zoom meetings, but because we had so many people registered to attend, the only option that could fit this many people was Zoom webinar. So we do have an open Q&A portal. We're going to ask you to submit your questions through the Q&A. And then, of course, this is being recorded so that we can share a recording with folks after, and also include in that email ways to take action as we face Trump 2025 together. And so I'll give folks just another minute to get settled, and then we'll get started with tonight's presentation. So thank you again for joining us. We really appreciate you making the time, and appreciate folks already using the Q&A box. Go ahead and test out that Q&A box, and it'll help us make sure that folks know what it is, and we can practice answering questions too. Thanks so much. I appreciate y'all doing it. Thank you, Sophia. I'm hanging in there. Really appreciate it. You're the best. Thanks for asking. Perfect. I'm doing good, Kate. I'm hanging in there. These are some great questions already coming in. This is fantastic. All right. Let's go ahead and get started. So my name is Anna V. Escamani. I'm proud to serve District 42 in the Florida State House Legislature, which encompasses parts of the city of Orlando, Winter Park, Belle Isle, Maitland, and the historic town of Eatonville. I'm really honored to have just won my reelection last week, but of course it was bittersweet as we saw across the state of Florida and around the country that extremism won in many different ways. And so, of course, we're here together to ensure that we are plotting a path where no one is left behind, where we can combat this extremism and ensure a brighter future for all. With that said, I would not be a webinar with Rep. Escamani if there wasn't an agenda. And so we're going to be spending about 90 minutes together. It's going to be a fast 90 minutes, and you'll be able to meet some amazing organizations and organizers who are on the ground fighting against extremism here in Florida and are preparing for that same work nationally. So first, we're going to actually take a moment for some mental health, just because I know this is a time of a lot of stress and anxiety. So we're going to hear from peer support space to kind of level set and just the importance of our mental health and well-being. Then we'll talk briefly about how do we get here. And to be really candid with everyone, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. And there are a lot of important perspectives and hot takes around us around why Democrats lost and why Trump is returning to the White House. Our main time together today is focusing on what we expect out of a Trump administration and how to combat that. But in that work, we will also build power to restore democracy and to put into place policies and infrastructure that actually champions the issues that we care about. So then we're going to pivot, of course, into the ways that you can help. And that'll feature us diving into specific policy silos and introducing you to leaders and organizations who are helping to lead the path and preparing to respond to these uncertain and, of course, very stressful times. And so the goals for our time together are going to be to provide a sense of solidarity in what is otherwise a chaotic and uncertain political climate. Like I said, we'll address overarching concerns about how we got here, but also provide the social capital and the network of support for how we get out. One of my most important takeaways for tonight is for you to know that you are not alone, that despite the environment, despite the hostility, despite the fear, that we are stronger together, and that there are Floridians who are committed to fighting back against this extremism and to winning elections and, again, restoring that sense of solidarity and inclusivity and to champion issues where everyone benefits. And with that said, we want to introduce you to those organizations who are leading in this way. And I also want you to know that this will not be the one and only event that we do. If you know anything about Team Anna, we are working for you, fighting for us, and we are constantly helping to bring people together and using education as a tool of empowerment to help combat misinformation and to really teach people how to be civically minded. I want to give a very special thank you to one of our speakers today, Jonathan Alguella, who you will hear from later today with Central Florida Jobs with Justice, who is a thought partner with me and building out this idea. And of course, we will be continuing with our coalition partners to build more content to help shift our plan forward. And it's not just me. For example, Congressman Maxwell Frost is also planning to host forums in the new year. So you will have many, many, many ways to get involved and to also, of course, build that power long term. So I first want to pass the virtual microphone over to a really good friend of mine who is the founder and executive director of Peer Support Space. Again, just to take a moment to center self-care and mental health and respite in this moment. So Yasmin, I'm going to go ahead and switch the slide over to your puppy and give you a moment to say, set the tone and remind people of the importance of their mental health and well-being during these times as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. That is Dee Dee on the screen. She is here with us as well. Please take whatever resonates tonight and leave the rest, or just enjoy the fact that you saw Dee Dee. That is a-okay too. I want to name that this work is important, and it's also just really heavy. So please meet your needs tonight. I welcome you to grab a dog, if you have a dog, a comfort item, to take breaks, to grab a snack, if you want to color, whatever you need to do to meet your needs tonight. But my name is Yasmin Flasterstein. I use she, they pronouns. I'm the co-founder and executive director of Peer Support Space. We have so many free peer-led resources, so spaces to not be fixed or analyzed or diagnosed, but just to connect with other people that have shared lived experiences. And where it's okay to not be okay, we have group peer support, one-to-one peer support. And we also have a peer respite, which is where you could take a break for a few days from your living environment and just get away for a little bit. So if you live in an environment where people keep talking about politics in a really negative way, come take a break with us. But I'm not here to talk about Peer Support Space. I'm here to talk about how in the world we could possibly self-care right now. And I will be honest, I was worried that maybe I wasn't the right person to share tips for when I myself am struggling right now. I'm struggling hard to be okay. I'm not quite okay. But I sat with how hard it would be for me to relate to someone that felt like they did have all the answers, and the importance of not allowing fear of imperfection to lead to inaction. So I am here. My intention is not to tell you how to feel or what you should do with that. My hope is to share a few tips of things that have been helpful for myself or that I have heard be helpful for other people. I think that we each hold collective wisdom. When systems fail us, we turn to one another. So I invite you all to tune into the things that are supporting your own self-tending right now, or any words of support or validation from one another throughout my talking. I want to start off by validating before moving into even self-care. Validating that a lot of our identities have been used as political scapegoats, validating the way that hatred and misinformation are leading so much decision-making, and that is actually terrifying. The rise of the normalization of transphobia, homophobia, xenophobia, misogyny, and just flat out hate is heartbreaking. If you currently feel hopeless or in despair, I'm not here to tell you that you don't have the right to feel that way and that there's a set timeline as to when you need to snap out of it. For some, doing something immediately may be helpful, and for others, we might need time to recuperate or we'll get burnt out. So that's going to look different for each of us. You're not a bad person if things feel insurmountable right now. It's so hard and it is so much, and the rest of our lives don't stop. And likely our lives were already stressful. We have stuff going on outside of this. No one person is going to fix this, but we can take turns taking rest as we need to. And I believe that we have to. And healing and processing happens on your own timeline. And if you need to lean on distraction and compartmentalizing right now, that is a-okay. So some tips I have for us, practicing self-compassion. Would you be as critical with others as you're being with yourself? Give yourself some grace. We are beautifully human. And as such, we don't always get to tell ourselves when to feel or when not to feel. And it's important to honor our emotions as we navigate this. Surround yourself with supportive company. Find community that shares your values, that values the intersecting identities that make you. Expand your definition of rest. In what ways can you rest physically, emotionally, mentally, sensory-wise, socially, creatively, or spiritually? Maybe physical rest looks like taking a nap or saying no to plans. Emotional rest might be processing your feelings or creating more boundaries. Mental rest might be taking breaks, or maybe it's scheduling time to panic. Sensory rest may be putting your phone on do not disturb after a certain time or taking time to be still. Social rest may be spending time with others, or it could be spending time alone. Creative rest may be taking a nature walk or free writing without judgment. And spiritual rest may be taking time to do breath work or praying, if that is for you. Each of these things will be beautifully unique for each of us. Another that has been big for me right now is avoiding doom scrolling or overconsumption of the news. How can you stay informed without burning yourself out? Perhaps setting time limits or boundaries as to when you can consume media or where you consume media from. Sitting with what kind of boundaries you can make. Personally, I inform myself until I start tuning into my body and I'm not doing so hot. And then I switch and log into my dog's Instagram, and she only follows other dogs and animals. And that is how I doom scroll when I just know there is going to be something that pops up on my feed that is just going to ruin my day. Focusing on what is in your control. There's so much unknown right now, and that is scary. It's easy to get lost in despair when we harp on what's not in our control. So what are some things that are in our control? Some examples might be the way we interact with others or lessons that we share with our kids. If you heal through helping, which I imagine many of you that are here tonight do, get involved where you can. Different things work for different people. With this, I want to validate that certain actions might not be accessible, possible, or safe, depending on an aspect of a person's identity or situation. And if you do heal through helping, what is your skill? Is it art? Is it holding space? Is it writing? Is it volunteering with a local organization? We're all inherently deserving of minimally glimmers. It's what I call pockets of joy. If they come to you, I invite you to welcome them without guilt. Sometimes we need to laugh so we don't cry. Besides, joy is an act of resistance in the face of those that don't want us to have it. So if for nothing else, be joyful out of spite. And sitting with what are the things that bring us joy. Maybe it's searching silly YouTube videos. Maybe it's watching a movie that brings you nostalgia vibes, playing a song, having a mini dance party. Mine's trash reality TV. I'm not proud of it, but it is great distraction. And then another big one too is don't forget about your basic needs. We are humans. I don't know if any of us need to hear that. But because you are a human, you therefore require certain levels of sleep, food, and water. So please take care of yourself. Set alarms to do so if you need to. I know when I'm stressed out, I really do forget to eat. I really do forget to drink water. Maybe having an accountability partner or a friend where you text each other throughout the day. Hey, have you had water? Have you had a snack? Can I bring you a snack? Really taking care of one another. These are just a few ways. I really want to lean into skill sharing though. I am one person. I definitely spend a lot of time holding space for others. So much of what I share is a collection of things that others have shared with me. But I encourage this to be the start of the conversation and for us to continue talking about rest with one another and to really lean into skill sharing and collective wisdom in one another. If you have any favorite quotes from your favorite elders, trailblazers, modern thought leaders, to share these with others. I know the chat isn't open today because it's webinar format, but continue the conversation outside of here. I did put out an ask when Representative Escamani asked me to do this, and I said, hey, y'all, what is helping with your self-tending right now? So I wanted to directly share from the words of other people. I have there's room for both hopefulness and helplessness. It does not need to be either or. Yoga, meditation, petting my dog or cat, nothing. I lost my only supports that helped. Time with my loved ones, taking it slowly, journaling, creativity, sleeping. There's deep grief that deserves to be validated and processed when ready. For the love of heck, have you had any water today? Rest when you need to, then get up when you can and do one small thing at a time that makes the world a better place. Find your thing, utilize your skills and capacity in a way that complements communal efforts. It's okay if your thing is not the thing that others demand of you. When you see how many people have been fighting for you since before you were born and how many people truly care, it's hard to not feel hope from that. Leaning into my comrades and community and mutual aid and tangible actions such as contributing to community fridges, organizing, and showing care to those I love. Finding grounding and reflecting on our queer, trans, and racialized ancestors that resisted comparable fascism. I take time to remind myself that stepping away from the flood of information can be an intentional tool to help me restore my soul. To do my advocacy work, I need to care for myself. And in times of strife and uncertainty, endeavor always to be fierce when and where it's needed and gentle when required. If any of you are like me, you probably heal through action. And I want to challenge us to ask ourselves, how are you doing really? Have you paused to ask that, or have you been in healer mode to support others? If it's comfortable, I wanted to challenge us for time's sake, 5 seconds. I want us for 5 seconds to just pause. I've learned that I'm more productive and effective when I access rest. I can do more in 3 days if I rest for 2 days than if I just keep going for 5 days. So if it's comfortable for any of you, I want to invite you for 5 seconds to not judge your feelings harshly, to just acknowledge them lovingly. If comfortable, tune into your feelings of your body against your chair, your feet in the ground, how your lungs expand when you breathe. Relax your jaw, drop your shoulders. And I am going to close my eyes for 5 seconds. And for anyone comfortable with it, I'm asking us to just pause. Thank you for those of us that joined in that. I appreciate you taking the time to tune into yourselves, to listen to some stuff that's been helpful for me. Hearing what's been helpful for others has been really helpful for me. And with that, something that is bringing me hope and joy to my mental health right now is knowing that we have people like Representative Eskamani in our corner. So I will pass the floor along.
Thank you so much, Yasmin. And I'm really grateful that you walked us through just those reminders and that exercise. And remember, y'all, this is a marathon, not a sprint. We are going to be facing 4 years of chaos. And so I definitely want us to be ready for that, because one of the main indicators that I have felt from Tuesday was exhaustion and just people not wanting to deal with this again. And I know it might be tempting to also tap out and to turn away from it, but it's more important than ever that we dig our heels in and that we get ready for this work long term, especially if we're going to win people back to our side on these issues, but of course also to protect our communities and to protect the US Constitution and the institutions that we care so deeply about. And Yasmin, I just want to read a comment in the chat for you, and that is, Yasmin, you are awesome. Thank you so much for being a part of this. It's so important to care for ourselves right now, and having that validation is so appreciated. Sending love to everyone right now. Let's build community. And so I just want to make sure you saw that feedback, and thanks again for doing it. So now a math that is not so friendly and not so happy, right? And I'm going to breeze through these pretty fast. I want to get to our community partners ASAP. So this is the shift in Republican candidate margin for President Trump compared from 2020 to 2024. So this is not a map of counties that went to President Trump. And y'all know that because Orange County did not go to President Trump. Orange County was blue. What this map is telling you is that support for Trump increased in every single county in the Sunshine State, including Orange County. In fact, in 2020, Trump received about 35% of the vote in Orange County, and this year was 43%. And so I share that because I often hear folks say, oh, I'm so glad, I live where I live. And that's true. I mean, obviously, your location also helps to define the values that your neighbors and you share and who represents you in office. And there is comfort in that. But I also want to make sure folks realize that none of us are immune from the extremism. And unfortunately, when it comes to people's voting decisions, they have been swayed, right? And there's, of course, different reasons for that. And like I said, a big question many people are asking, and I see it in the Q&A as well, is how did we get here and what is the Democratic Party going to do? And I want to be very candid. This is not a space for hot takes or a space for regurgitating information a lot of us have already read and shared and heard. I want you to know that obviously one of my collective goals is to address these concerns. And I'm proud to say that not only did we win our election last Tuesday, but we actually flipped 5 precincts, and we also secured the support of 2 precincts that went to us and went to President Trump. And so I share that because it is important that we are very candid and honest and self-reflecting on why we got to where we are now. But I also want to make sure that we're thinking about the community we want to build in the future. And that's really the heart of tonight's conversation. However, just a quick list of some of my perspectives in being in this work now in office for 6 years, but being an advocate and a campaigner and an organizer since I was in college. There's a lot of very serious concerns that we each need to work towards repairing. And that includes inability by many of our candidates to reach, focus, and address the needs of everyday people, especially their economic experiences, which then opens the door for scapegoating and fear mongering to really take root, further splitting communities up, and of course, specifically targeting marginalized communities. And as we saw in a very explicit way this past year, specifically targeting the transgender community and immigrant communities. These misinformation campaigns are rampant and well-funded. There's not a very strong infrastructure to combat it. And of course, we do need to meet people where they're at, which means investing in activities like door knocking and community building long term. There's also, of course, apathy and disappointment among voters towards party leaders that resulted in not just protest votes, but of course, people not voting at all. And then I also want to be very candid that I find that in general, there's a perception, and I think it's fairly accurate, that many candidates are just out of touch from the electorate. They're seen as elite, corporate minded, and not people centered, which is why I think that there needs to be a serious veto of current party leadership and a clean sweep of who's in charge. But again, I'm not here to focus on issue right now. There will be many other conversations for us to have in that regard. Instead, I really want to focus on the path ahead on the policy front. And what do we do to build power in our response to Trump, to expand the umbrella, to expand the base of support? I shared this article with folks if you RSVP'd early for this Zoom, and I have a PhD in public administration. I am a nerd and found some interest in the rise of autocracy and the history of pro-democracy movements. And some of these points really resonated with me to answer the question of how we got here, right? And this article was written by scholars at the Harvard Kennedy School back in October of 2022. And this is direct quote from that article. It speaks to the fact that ongoing economic strain may therefore lead to decisive GOP victories in both 2022 and 2024. It also speaks to how the business class may allow or openly align with authoritarianism to avoid engaging seriously with the demands of organized labor. And again, it creates this opening, right, for working class people to feel left behind. And of course, the irony is that the Trump administration is going to hurt workers' rights, and we'll be talking about that tonight. But I share this slide as a reminder that we really need to be intentional in where we spend our money. We need to be intentional in building multiracial, multi-generational, and multi-class coalitions. And again, that work is difficult, especially in this environment, but it's super, super, super important. Partly because we are dealing with, at this point, 60, 70 plus years of far-right infrastructure and far-right extremism being established. And I won't have a lot of time to dive into this too deep, but we all know the MAGA movement, and we recognize that for its extremism. But extremism existing in the far right started way before that. I would even date it back to 1964 with McCarthyism, with the rise of right-wing conspiracy theories about people who are different. And of course, you see that facilitate the creation of these conservative think tanks under the leadership of then President Ronald Reagan, and really from the origin of Goldwater, presidential candidate Goldwater, that of course brings it to where we are today with the Tea Party movement in 2010 and the establishment of multi-state funding trusts that pour money into these conservative think tanks. And then in 2016, with the appearance of Trump in the initial presidential run, the poisoning of truth, trust, reason, and civility, which of course creates a audience of people who see lies as truth, right? And of course, lead to an electorate that doesn't always vote in their best interest, but vote based on information that is provided to them, whether it's true or not. So I share this timeline and this perspective because none of what we have to do in front of us is going to be easy. We will be outspent, but we don't have to be outworked. And so when we talk about the expectation of what is to come, we know what is outlined, right? Project 2025, the so-called Mandate for Leadership, is a 900-page manual that speaks to a reorganization of the federal government and, of course, how to feed into a conservative agenda. And we also already are beginning to see the appointments being made by President Trump in this regard. And I'm sure all of us are outraged by many of these appointments, including the most recent one of Matt Gaetz to be Attorney General. And Matt Gaetz actually just minutes ago resigned from Congress to prepare himself for this nomination. I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat and in the Q&A about the nomination process. And so just so we have that context quickly, y'all know that the United States Constitution outlines this process, and the Senate does typically have to confirm nominations, and it is a 51 vote margin, 50% plus one. And of course, there is something where there's a process where presidents can potentially circumvent the confirmation process by making what are called recess appointments. And it's right now, Trump and his supporters are pushing for this, which is incredibly concerning. It's hard to predict what is going to happen. Of course, a Senate majority leader was selected, and based on that campaign, the actual winner did not make a commitment to recess appointments. Rick Scott did and did not win that race. But it is very concerning that, of course, as we face the rise of an autocrat, that they already are attempting to bend what have been constitutionally defined checks and balances. But if you're me, this shouldn't surprise you, but it just further elevates the importance of us being here tonight and preparing for anything. Because if you think it can't get worse, brace yourself. I mean, we are up against decades of infrastructure, decades of misinformation, and of course are faced with a very extreme administration who is revengeful and doesn't have any care for rule of law. So lessons from history as I pivot to our speakers tonight. When we look at effective pro-democratic and nonviolent resistance movements, there's typically 4 key capacities that you have to build to be sustainable and to be successful. The first one is large-scale diverse participation. Second, the ability to elicit defections among the opponent's pillars of support. So what does this mean? It means putting pressure on those who are loyal to Trump, whether they're individuals or corporations. So ensuring that you are strategic and targeted in your advocacy to try to pull those pillars of support away. The ability to maintain organizational discipline and resilience as violence against the movement escalates. And I want to be candid with y'all that I'm a firm believer in nonviolent resistance, but of course we we can't say the same for those who fall under the Trump administration. And of course, we know there was a insurrection in 2020 that we have to be very thoughtful to, because that is an act of violence. So there is a history of violence here. And so though I'm a firm believer in the ability to protect one another and protect ourselves, we do have to, of course, maintain as much as we can focus and discipline within a pro-democracy movement to not fall in temptation to those situations. And of course, the ability of a movement to innovate to new tactics beyond the act of just protesting. I see folks already asking in the chat, when's the next march? When's the next protest? And I love that energy. I really appreciate that passion, but I want to be really intentional with where energy goes. And I think the act of protest is very important. But we also have to look at mutual aid funds. We have to look at non-cooperation, boycotts. There are other tools of advocacy that we need to consider and not just kind of fall back into this pattern of protesting. Remember, protesting should never be a goal. It is a tactic to a goal. So the question you have to ask yourself is, what is your goal? How do you get to that goal? And though protesting is a very important tactic, and of course, one well used in American history, and one that I personally am very, very familiar with, I want to be strategic in how energy is leveraged. Because as we talked about in the beginning of this call, people are tired, and we have to maintain this momentum and build a pro-democracy movement that will be sustained. And that's why it's also really important not to centralize this work, but to build coalitions among many different organizations. And so I want to offer some quick definitions as we introduce our speakers. The definition of leadership is one that has various forms. The definition that I like to use is based upon the scholar Marshall Gantz and their work on organizing and their theories of change. And so this definition is grounded in the notion that leadership requires accepting responsibility for enabling others to achieve purpose under conditions of uncertainty. And I would argue that we are in some serious conditions of uncertainty. Now, what is organizing? Organizing is a form of leadership that enables a constituency to turn its resources into the power to achieve its goals through tactics like recruitment, training, and development of leadership. Organizing is about equipping everyday people with the power to achieve shared outcomes. And that's what tonight is about. We want you not only to understand that you're a leader in this work, we want to introduce you to folks who have been leading the way for years, in some cases decades, and defending for our collective freedoms, taking on what I would argue has been the experimentation of Project 2025 in Florida, and ways, of course, that you can be a part of that work and to get involved. My last definition is that of power. Some people are scared of the term power because you hear power and you think dictators, right? You think super problematic people. Power is neither good or bad. It depends who wields it. Power is neutral. And I'm a firm believer in building power together and building collective efficacy together, because we can't accomplish any of our shared goals without building coalition, without having courageous conversations among different experiences and identities to find the commonality and to work towards that shared goal. I define power as organized people, resources, and ideas. And so I would argue that as those who subscribe to progressive and liberal values, that we have some really great organized ideas, but we don't have the people to reach. We don't have the people to help reach more people. We don't have an organized resources to reach those people. And so we might have the best ideas to solve problems. We don't have organized resources or organized people, then we're going to keep losing. We're going to keep finding ourselves playing defense, and we're not going to be able to shift the direction of this state, let alone this country. And so I want you to have this framework as we introduce our speakers of what is power. It is organized people, resources, and ideas. And tonight we're going to be providing the initial foundation for organized people to accomplish our organized ideas. And we're going to introduce you to organizations that provide those resources, but candidly need more resources and more people to accomplish their missions. And so I'm going to step back. I'm going to try to grab some questions in the chat as our speakers begin. But we're going to be highlighting a few different issue silos tonight. And again, I'm going to try to get us out by 8:30. And I appreciate folks patient with us and just sticking around for the heart of this conversation. And so without further ado, I see some really great questions already about public health and major concerns of the Trump administration when it comes to, of course, who's going to lead Health and Human Services? What does that mean for vulnerable communities? What does that mean for vaccines and public health overall? What does it mean for the Affordable Care Act? And especially for our children with disabilities. And so I want to introduce a good friend of mine who's been leading this work for over a decade in Florida, and that is Scott Darius. I'm going to ask him to go ahead and get his camera on and get ready. I think he has some slides to share with us as well. So Scott, if you need me to, I'll stop sharing my screen so you can share yours. But please walk us through, what are you expecting to see out of the Trump administration as it pertains to public health? And what do you want people to know? And how can they help get more involved? So I'm going to go ahead and let you share your screen.
Awesome. I think it's up currently. I hope it's up currently. But yeah, just thanks to
Yeah,
everyone
you're
for
good.
having me tonight and for letting me be a part of this space. Yeah, I just know the time that we're all in. But just real quick, for those who might be new to Florida Voices for Health, we're a statewide health advocacy organization, and our mission is to increase access to care for those most vulnerable populations, especially, right? I think we work on behalf of all Floridians, but realize that there are some communities facing higher disparities than others. And the way we do that work is really twofold. It's coalition building, and we're fortunate to work with some great people around the state. But at the heart of it, it's storytelling. It's connecting to those people who have been impacted by the healthcare system in one way or another, and hopefully empowering them to share their stories in those places where it might make a difference. Uh, Before sharing a little bit about what we might expect from the new administration, just a little context I think is helpful so folks get a sense of just what's at stake for Floridians. I think the bottom line as you read through this is that there's still so many Floridians that are uninsured. We're still one of the most expensive states for healthcare, and that's even if you have private insurance. And also that the inaffordability of care is really driving people to drastic measures. And one of the few bright spots I think we have as a state is that the ACA continues to be extremely popular. Since the beginning, we've had the highest enrollment, and that continues each open enrollment. And my navigator partners would get mad if I didn't mention that it's open enrollment. So check out plans. But as we look ahead, some of our biggest concerns are around the ACA specifically. First on an administrative policy level, I think based on what we saw the last time around and what we've heard come up so far, there's all sorts of threats to funding, especially for the marketplace as a whole, but also for those navigators who we know are so crucial to connecting people to coverage. Kind of instead, what we expect to see is the promotion of, they call them short-term plans, but we call them junk plans. Plans that are relatively cheap, they cover nothing, they cover just under a year. But what people don't realize is that is how little they cover up until they have an emergency and realize that they don't have what they need at that moment. The ACA also, prohibits discrimination based on race, gender, orientation, and disability. And I think there's a concern around that protection, just because insurers, it helps them create the kind of risk pools that they enjoy. But then there are also threats to the ACA on the legislative policy level. There's concern that they'll eliminate the premium tax credits, which we know make the marketplace affordable. And then there's all sorts of deregulation, options for deregulation that, again, I think just kind of emboldens insurance companies to start squeezing people even more. And then for those who are concerned for Medicaid as a program and all the people it serves, including those individuals with disabilities, I think there's always been this fear, and we saw it in 2016, around block grants for the program, which is really just a fancy way to say budget cuts, right? So giving states less funding to support the Medicaid program, and particularly around the kind of financial assistance that exists as an incentive for states to expand Medicaid. We know Florida still hasn't done it. There's still 500,000 Floridians who don't have access to care whatsoever. And if we eliminate the last kind of incentives that the state has to hold on to, then it makes our work that much harder to pass it. So as we land the plane, just to say, in terms of next steps, what can we do? I'm holding on, still kind of holding on to 2016, unfortunately, but lessons learned from that, right? One is how thick and fast the threats came, but also two, how effective we were just pushing back, right? Like when people came together in mass, just, yeah, we were able to stop a lot of terrible things, including fundamentally protecting the ACA alone. So as we prepare for this moment, I'll suggest and invite you guys to join the work and in the way that feels best for you. You can subscribe to Florida Voices for Health either on our socials or through the website, and that's really just to stay informed. Like I said, things are going to come fast, and it's staying on top of it and being ready to be part of that pushback. And as we prepare to mobilize, I also invite you to join Healthcare for Florida, which is our grassroots coalition space. There we do a lot of advocacy trainings and mobilizations, including being present at the Capitol in Tallahassee every week of legislative session, showing up at delegation meetings in counties around the state, but also having a presence at committee weeks in Tallahassee. So if any of that is of interest, please feel free to reach out. And then finally, while it feels like we're in this defensive crouch, right? I think there is this opportunity still to push for a proactive vision for healthcare. And I say that because as a storytelling organization, we have this privilege of, connecting with people all over the state who are in many cases like sweet enough to allow us into their homes and like share their stories with us. And there have been multiple times that we're in, the homes of people who maybe don't agree with us on everything, right? Like, yeah, Trump flags, the whole bit. But how moved I am that you can sit and talk to someone for hours about healthcare and like the needs that they have and what they're experiencing, and politics never comes up. So all that to say that it's clear that there's a lot of hearts and minds. It's clear that winning hearts and minds, I think to the point Representative Escamani made, we have to like start convincing people and talking to them where they are. And I think healthcare gives us a great opportunity to do that. The last big thing in terms of pushing for a proactive vision, there's a Medicaid expansion ballot initiative that's still ongoing, and there's multiple ways to get involved. Helping to get petitions signed, helping to identify hubs, and helping to grow the network across the state. But yeah, we just hope to continue to do this work together. It'll be a long couple of years, but we'll do it together and get through it. Thank you, guys.
I really appreciate, Scott, you mentioning just the lessons learned from the Trump administration prior, and of course, highlighting the wins that we had. We often forget that we protected the Affordable Care Act from being completely eliminated. And that win only happened because of people organizing, putting pressure on policymakers, and of course, the late John McCain helping to make that saving vote. I know sometimes it feels that things are much more dire right now, and arguably they are, but the people power is so important for us to remember. And I know a lot of folks are concerned about children with disabilities and adults with disabilities. And part of the long-term goal in Florida, for those who don't know, is to expand Medicaid by a ballot initiative. And so I wonder if you can quickly just talk about how Floridians could help expand Medicaid in our state, because that also is not just a way to build political power, but it would help us win people back by seeing how a grassroots initiative led by organizations like ours and yours is the path to go to expand healthcare versus taking it away. So we can quickly highlight that initiative, and then we'll shift over to public education next.
Yeah, just to say the polling's always shown that there's strong support on both sides. And what I've always found interesting is there's always the initial number where support stands when you ask people the first time. But there's a number where after you've gotten a chance to talk to someone about it, where their support lands, and that number always goes up. And just to say that it's in that talking to people, there's both the opportunity to like do Medicaid expansion, but I think build relationship and start to bring people over and to, yeah, kind of our way of thinking, looking out for each other and why it all kind of matters at the end of the day. So if you are interested in the ballot initiative work, I'd encourage you to follow and join, sign up at floridadecideshealthcare.org.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Scott. We have a lot to cover tonight. And again, we will not only share this recording, but the links that Scott shared, we'll make sure everyone has those as well. So let's dive into another really important issue, and that is public education. So I'm going to let Damaris introduce herself. And Damaris, one of the questions coming to the chat has to do with IEPs and students with disabilities and what the world would look like if Department of Education was completely dismantled, which is something Trump campaigned on and obviously has been top of mind for many educators and families. And so I want to give you the space to walk us through your organization, what you do, what you're watching and worried about, and what can we do to defend public education and prioritize the health and well-being of all of our kids.
Thank you so much. My name is Damaris Allen. I'm the Executive Director of Families for Strong Public Schools. We work with families, specifically parents, students, and teachers, to come alongside them and advocate for a strong public education system because we know how important that is. It's the cornerstone of our democracy, right? It's really important. And I'm really glad that you brought that up. So one of the things we're really concerned about is our students with disabilities and their ability to, our concerns with their losing their federal protections. So one of the things that came up in our universal voucher program that passed a couple of years ago was that the second a student took a universal voucher, they were basically waiving their federal protections, right? The parents weren't, the students weren't guaranteed to have services. The private school may or may not be ADA compliant, all of those things. And then there were no repercussions once you took that voucher. Only public schools were required to follow and make sure that all students had access to a free and appropriate public education. Now, the concern with that is what's going to happen if we institute federal vouchers, right? And so that's a question I've been asking a lot of attorneys this week. And I think a lot of us are trying to still figure out like what is going to happen as we move forward. So there's a lot of space of like living in this uncertainty. In addition to that, who is going to safeguard these? So in Project 2025, it says it'll fall under Health and Human Services and if the Department of Education is eliminated. But what does that look like? Are they going to have the capacity to follow up with these things? And are they going to ensure that our students are protected? Another thing I'm really, really concerned about is funding, right? So the vast majority of federal funding goes to students with disabilities, but also to Title I and what's schools. And so what is going to happen is that eventually the goal is to phase out Title I funding and to put that on the state within 10 years. Now, if you know anything about public education in our state, you know that we are chronically underfunded and have never been fully funded. And now what happens when then we all of a sudden have to make up for this huge shortfall in federal funding that we have been dependent on for so long? And so while we fall on the bottom of funding, like if we were looking at a ranking of the state, if we fall on the bottom for state funding, we fall in the top 10 for federal funding. So we get an enormous amount of funding from the federal government to help our schools and our students. And so what happens when that disappears? The kids with the greatest need are the ones that are going to hurt the most. In addition to that, I would say the good news-ish, right, is that Floridians are in the best position or one of the best positions to push back on these things that are going to come with Project 2025 because most of them have already been implemented in our state. We already have universal vouchers. We already have parental rights in education. We already have education choice options. We already have students losing their, I mentioned earlier about the IDEA. When you take your voucher, you lose the ability to do that. We already have pushback on there's a lot of questions around summer lunch programs and things like that. And so there's often a lot of pushback on that. We already have to have parents sign off to say if, you can call a child even a nickname, right? Like there's a lot of the discussions about, dealing with sex at birth as opposed to gender, right? And so a lot of these things have already been tested in Florida. And so we are uniquely in a position to say to other states who are combating this, let's get together. Let's talk about how this has really impacted our kids. What is the effect it has had on our students? How has it affected their mental health, their ability to perform, their ability to feel safe and valued and loved and grow as a person, right? And so we're really uniquely positioned to fight back on this. And so what I would say is I know very well that it seems bleak and horrible and terrible, but there are a lot of us who are working very hard to ensure that this, even if these things come to fruition, that we can pull them back, that we can be in a position where we can build community and help other people understand. So as time goes on, I would encourage you to talk to your neighbors, get engaged, follow us. All of our social media is Strong FL Schools. That is our website as well. We will be putting out calls to action. Share your stories with others, develop community and talk with one another, because there are a lot of us who care deeply about public education. And if you question that, all you have to do is look at the elections in Florida. And so to end on a positive note, I will tell you that 21 out of 22 local referendums for public school passed, raising over $1.5 billion for students. And those passed with a majority of both Republicans and Democrats and NPAs, all of them voting for this. The vast majority of extremist school board candidates lost in Florida because people care about their public schools. People care about how these policies are impacting students, and they want to make a difference, and they want to stand up for these students to ensure that they have a bright and hopeful future. So I encourage you to talk to one another. Don't isolate yourselves. Don't be overwhelmed by what seems like a crushing despair sometimes with what's coming, because we collectively have the power to make a difference. So thank you so much. Please come join us. We'd love to have you talk about education and share in the fight, because together we can make a difference. So thank you.
Thank you, Damaris. Really, really appreciate you as a public school kid myself. Thank you for outlining what you are expecting and, of course, ways for us to organize to defend public education. I also want to emphasize that this is where local government makes a huge difference. And so not every county, of course, has supportive school board members, but for everyone who is watching, if you're in Orange County or surrounding counties in Florida, remember that you need to not only advocate at that federal level and state level, but don't forget that your school boards are supposed to be, to what degree they can, those guardrails. And so if we're going to lose, for example, the support for our children with disabilities from a federal level, then we need our locals to step up and make up the difference. And we have to hold locals accountable to that. And I would even urge you to have those conversations now, because we need our school boards, especially those that are thoughtful to these issues, to be ready to respond. And this is where we go back to building pro-democracy movements. We have to work with our non-governmental organizations, nonprofit, grassroots, mutual aid organizations, alongside our local institutions that will be hopefully somewhat sheltered from the policy changes. Of course, they'll be impacted financially, but that's where mutual aid can potentially make up the difference. And so thank you, Damaris, for uplifting this, and definitely grabbing his questions. Bethany was asking, how will this impact the IEP with the various therapy services? I feel like you addressed that. If you want to ask something more, please do. And I'm trying to grab any other education questions, but I think that's the I work in higher education as an advisor. How are colleges, universities affected? And I will answer that question. But I'll toss it to you. Another quick question. My dad is an ESC teacher. I don't think of this until now, but is his job at risk? I don't know if you have any thoughts to those questions, and I can tackle the higher education question as well.
So I will say the one thing I did find fascinating about or concerning about higher education was student loans, student loan forgiveness, lack of ability to have plus loans. So parent plus loans and things like that are concerns. But in addition to that, I'm not sure. I can't imagine that there will be a space where teachers' jobs will really be at risk, because we we desperately need teachers. Now, does that mean that you're going to have access to all the things you need to be successful? I think that is the greater concern of impact, right? Like, it's not that the position won't be there. It's, are you going to have the tools necessary to be successful in your position?
Thank you, Damaris. And on the higher ed front, and I'm going to go ahead and welcome, say thank you, Damaris, for being here, and welcome on our workers' rights and the economy speakers to go ahead and turn on your cameras and get prepared, because I'm trying to keep this tight schedule moving. But on the higher education piece, one of my concerns, candidly, is losing these guardrails, because as we see, of course, attacks on higher educational institutions in Florida, one of our firewalls have been the accreditation bodies that are approved by Department of Education. And I am concerned that not only would that be dismantled, but there could even be accrediting bodies developed that accredit, for example, Christian nationalist schools that could then receive public money to operate. And so I am just speculating on this, this just from my years of experience in the higher ed field. I've seen at the state legislature attacks on curriculum, the insertion of conservative orthodoxy into the classroom, the takeover of New College. So we're no longer the canary in the coal mine in Florida. We are the vulture circling, right, these institutions. And so it's very important, again, to think about these worst case scenarios. And of course, the path forward is to activate students, activate faculty, push back against these rule changes, because some of this won't be policy, right? It'll be regulatory. So we have to be ready for regulatory changes too, which again, I know is overwhelming, but if you're part of our network, we will keep you posted, right, on what is happening, when to take action, and what is the most effective use of your time. And you can definitely count on us to be in the front lines alongside these phenomenal leaders in the labor movement and here in workers' rights. So I'm going to first toss it. Well, actually, I don't know if Ella or Jonathan want to go first, but I'll toss it to Ella first to and introduce yourself, and then I'll let y'all take it from here. So now to talk about workers' rights and just the economy in general and those concerns, please join me welcoming Ella from Unite Here, Jonathan with Sunflower Jobs with Justice, and Julie, one of our union organizers here at Disney Springs.
Great. Thank you. My name is Ella Wood. I am the political director for Unite Here Local 737. Really glad to see so many people here asking for action steps. So really excited to get to that as we keep talking. I'll talk about that very soon. But first I wanted to say, I'm sure a lot of people here, like me, feel a lot of angst about what it means to see working class voters leaving our side in elections and concern about where we go from here. And I think building our worker solidarity muscle is super important as Democrats, as liberals, as people on the left, to build that muscle and how we help fight and show worker solidarity is a huge part of how we change that bigger political picture that we're all looking at and really concerned about. So I think we do have to be prepared for the things that are going to get harder under a Trump administration. They will either quickly or slowly replace the pro-worker members of the National Labor Relations Board, which governs how unions run and grow. They will defang a lot of the workplace regulatory bodies that keep people safe at work. They are certainly interested in passing big national legislation like national right to work laws. And we will see them using anti-immigrant and anti-LGBTQ tools as a tool of the bosses. The workplace is always one of the places where we see these tools turned against people to control workers the most. And all of that will add up to making it harder to strike, making it harder to make non-union workplaces into union workplaces without workers being fired or intimidated. And so I think for all of us, it's really important for us to do everything we can to slow down any of that legislation, regulation, and appointments that will hurt us. And we have to push really hard for the Democrats to reappoint their labor board members right now. All of that work matters. Anything we can slow down and delay is a huge, huge victory in what it means for the rest of the work we have to do. But even when we do that work, we do need to be honest that worker organizing is going to be harder than it is now. And what all of the things I listed mean is that we will have fewer institutions and legal tools that exist to support worker victories. What that doesn't mean is that we can't continue fighting and winning. The good news is the deck is always stacked against working people. It always has been, and we win anyway. It's what we know how to do the best. And I think the biggest thing that we need allies of workers and workers' rights advocates to understand is that right now, policy solutions are not the most important thing for us to focus on in these next few years. Instead, what we need to do is to fight company by company and injustice by injustice and in every workplace that we can. So for those of us in the labor movement, it means we have to beat corporations directly. It means workers taking on corporate greed in their own workplaces. And for our allies, it means we need you to have our backs and jump in with us fight by fight. Anytime there's a chance for you to back up workers who are fighting for themselves, that's what we need you to do. And that is what we do best. Fights directly with companies have always been my favorite kind of fight to get to work on. It's where we win the most and change people's lives in enormous ways. And taking more people, more workers through that experience of fighting and winning together is how we change their whole orientation to politics and the world, and how we change how they think about the institutions around us and the coalition that we're trying to build. So to the end of doing that, I get to introduce somebody who's been putting herself and her job on the line for exactly that kind of fight right here in Central Florida. She's doing exactly what we need more people to be doing and showing up to support. This is Julie, who is a worker leader right here at Disney Springs at the Patina restaurants, who's been standing up against sexual harassment and for a fair process to organize her union, and was just fired and is fighting to get her job back. Julie, go for it.
All right. Hi, I'm Julie Ruiz. I grew up in Mexico. I came here alone for a better opportunity of life. I'm currently homeless. I'm living in a living room without any privacy. I started working at Pizza Ponte Disney Springs. The pay is very low. I'm proud of myself because I'm here by my own, and I'm gonna keep fighting for what I need and to keep growing and succeeding in life. At Ponte Disney Springs, experience advisor. He commented on guest bodies to me, and one day he begged me to stay late to work and drive me all the way home. I felt very unsafe. And I wasn't the only one, even though my coworkers and I spoke about it to management by the harassment. He wasn't fired. He continued to be working there for 6 months. I spoke about it and I told my story in a press conference in April. Then I went to Disney Springs to the entrance, and I passed flyers to guests that tell the truth about our second-class status at Disney Springs. We put my story in and picture on those flyers. 1 week after I passed out these flyers, I came to work wearing an earbud, and the chef told me to remove the earbud. So I did. He said if I wear it again, I was gonna get suspended. But management didn't wait for me to wear it again. At the end of that day, they told me I was suspended for having the earbud in. They called me while I was suspended and told me I was fired. But my supervisor wasn't fired for sexual harassment. But 1 week after I passed these flyers, I was fired for wearing an earbud. I'm fighting for my job back. I'm going to keep fighting to get my job back and to have a fair process to the union. Don't Donald Trump's re-election shows that we need unions now more than ever. And people like me have the right to fight for themselves and to speak up. I'm not just fighting for me, I'm fighting for all of the women who had been harassed and speak up for themselves. And I'm fighting for all of the workers. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. I love listening to Julie talk about standing up and fighting and not sitting down. But we also need everybody else's help. So we are, as soon as I hit send in the chat, we are officially launching a petition that we can use as part of our fight to get back Julie's job and get a fair process for Julie and her coworkers to organize for a union. So I am putting that link in the chat now. You are the very first people with the chance to sign and back them up. Please share it, please stay tuned and look for ways to get more deeply involved. Jobs with Justice and Jonathan are one of my favorite ways to do that. So I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Ella. Thank you, Julie. And good evening, everybody. My name is Jonathan Alingu. I'm co-executive director of Central Florida Jobs with Justice. We're a coalition that harnesses the power of community, labor, youth to win campaigns that improves the daily lives of everybody within the state. And we are fighting for the ability for people to have ownership of their workplace, ownership of their government, ownership of their neighborhoods too. And I'm really happy to follow Julie and Ella because I think I'll be one of the first to sign the petition for sure. So thank you, Ella, for sharing that. And I know a lot of people here are wondering like, okay, I'll sign a petition. What else can I do? There's more that you can do. You think like, oh, I don't know workers like that. Yes, you do. You do know workers. They live next door to you. They're your family members. That's what we are positioned to do as Jobs with Justice. Ella, Julie, Unite Here 737 is part of our coalition, part of our board, executive board, that's fighting for these things every single day. In Orlando, in Orange County, in Hillsborough County, in Tampa, and those areas too. I think Representative Escamani mentioned organized people, organized money. That's a thing that we do. We organize people, organize money, but we also want to prepare for the crisis before it happens. And we know that with the of course the election, that's got a lot of people in shock. A lot of people are tender. They don't know where to go and what to do. That's okay. That's the natural feeling. There's time. We have not a lot of time, but we have time. So like Representative Escamani said, like today is not to think about like this is the plan we're moving forward. We need to figure out who's on our side, who are we building with, because the crisis will happen in January and we're gonna be ready for it. We weren't ready for it in 2016, but we're gonna be ready for it now. We have a lot of time and a lot of experience to be ready for those things. And so everything that Julie mentioned was right. Like when Trump administration starts implementing things, it's going to impact people's wages, people's immigration status, workers' immigration status. Sexual harassment cases are going to run wild for sure, because he's going to erase all the mechanism, all the protections for that. So what do we do right here? That things we can do locally. We can organize ourselves locally to make that happen. And so we're going to need everybody here that signed up wanting to know what to do. Jobs with Justice, we're a coalition. So if you don't know, folks, if you want to be involved in movements like this that protect workers and you're not a union, you can be part of our organization. We can connect you and be really strategic and think about campaigns that really impact people's day to day, every day. So that's all I'll say because I know we're running out of time. But connect with me, connect with Jobs with Justice, cfjwj.org. That's how you can find us if you want to be a volunteer, you want to support, you want to be in solidarity, because this is not about charity. It's not about, I'm going to sign a petition and go. There's more things that we need to be doing. So we want you to be part of that movement. And that's what we're here to cultivate, particularly for economic rights. Because that's what they were fighting for, right? That's what they were campaigning on. Trump's campaigning on people's the working class, but he's not going to do anything for the working class. You all know that. So what do? We got to be organized to fight for that. What does that look like for us? And so that's what we do at Jobs But Justice. So thank you all.
Amazing. And I really appreciate Julie sharing your personal story. I know that's never easy to do. Ella, for your policy breakdown when it comes to just the ability to unionize. And of course, I know there's a question in the chat too about the impact of tariffs and what do we do when prices ultimately go up. And my advice would be to echo Jonathan's points is that the Trump campaign said they were going to address the plight of the working class. And yet we already know what's going to happen. Unions are going to be busted. Corporate consolidation is going to continue. Corporate greed is going to dominate the policy agenda. And of course, when it comes to the impact of tariffs, prices are going to go up. And so we need to be ready to ensure that the everyday American and Floridian, especially those that voted for President Trump, understand that it is his policy agenda, it is his cronies, it is his appointments who are creating this anti-worker environment that is impacting the cost of our living and not holding corporations accountable for stock buybacks, for property insurance rate hikes, for all the daily cost challenges that we face. And Jonathan, I appreciate you wrapping up those points and really emphasizing that right now, the image of the Democratic Party as being a champion for the working class is waning. And that's one reason why I really wanted y'all here to emphasize the local labor movements happening in our state and to really encourage folks, even if you're not in a union, to help unions. And I saw a question in the chat from a UCF student of what they can do at UCF to protect higher education. Support your faculty union at UCF. Watch both the Board of Trustees and the Board of Governors. These are other institutions that make decisions on higher education. And of course, we'll share more guidance, more trainings, more educational forums to cover these topics in greater detail. But please know that supporting unions is an act of resistance when it comes to defending our economy, defending our workers, and pushing back against the Trump agenda. And so with that said, I want to continue the conversation. I see folks putting their cameras on, so we'll go in and transition. And so I actually want to next tackle civil rights. And since Ariel, you're already up online, we can also jump into immigrant rights. And then we have LGBTQ plus rights, environmental policy, and reproductive rights. So we do have a few more topics that we need to cover. So I'll encourage folks as much as you can to be tight with time. But let me go ahead and toss it to Jonathan Weber, who's with the Southern Poverty Law Center, who wants to talk about the concerns with civil rights, voting rights, of course, more attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. And so, Jonathan, I'll toss it to you, and then we'll do immigrant rights with Ariel.
Yeah, thank you so much, and good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to participate tonight. My name is Jonathan Weber. I use the pronouns he, him, his. I'm the Florida Policy Director for the Southern Poverty Law Center, and I'm actually based up here in Tallahassee. For those of you that may be unfamiliar with my organization, the Southern Poverty Law Center is a catalyst for racial justice in the South and beyond, working in partnership with communities to dismantle white supremacy, strengthen intersectional movements, and advance the human rights of all people. Before I get started, I do want to thank Rep. Escamani and her incredible support staff for convening this space for us tonight. It really matters, and I've been looking forward to this all week because I think it really means something. As has been already mentioned, Florida has been the laboratory for democracy for a lot of the policies found in Project 2025 and on Donald Trump's wish list. Among them are some significant changes to the right of citizens to easily participate in our elections. And while there are a lot of ideas floating around about what he may or may not make a priority, I'm going to talk about a few that have seemingly bubbled to the top or have been explicitly written down in that giant Project 2025 document. So I'm going to start, though, just by saying in Florida, just a couple of years ago, you may be familiar, the legislature and the governor approved a law that created the new Office of Election Crimes and Security right here in Florida. This office infamously arrested over 20 individuals for voting illegally or registering illegally in the run-up to the 2022 election. Many of those arrested were Black Floridians, and they were issued voter ID cards by the county, which has approval from the state. And in some of those instances, they were encouraged to register by the staff at the Supervisor of Elections office. Thankfully, most of those cases were thrown out, but the high-profile scare tactic of arrest and having their pictures plastered on every local newspaper, that was successful in stoking fear. And the governor's failure to actually get the prosecutions he wanted didn't stop him from then working with the legislature to change the law again to consolidate all of these types of elections crimes under the Attorney General to ensure that they are prosecuted and made full example. Project 2025 attempts to do something similar by moving federal election-related offenses from the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division to the Criminal Division. This change allows for similar investigations like the Florida Office of Elections Crimes, but at the national level with big national money. I'm not sure who in Donald Trump's cabinet is going to stop him from his worst inclinations of targeting and harassing his own political opponents. That's why I love spaces like this, because that firewall job is going to have to be up to people like us to do our can to stop it where we can. Project 2025, if implemented, of course, also allows the federal government to access state voter rolls if they choose to receive certain types of grant funding. A lot of election administration work simply cannot happen without funding from the federal government, and we are afraid that this could be weaponized against states or localities that do not support the current administration. It could also lead to mass voter purges or challenges using bogus, incomplete, or misleading data. It really makes a lot of us pro-election advocates unsettled. Project 2025 also calls for removing aspects, of President Biden's directive to promote the ability of federal agencies to act as voter registration portals, similar to, say, how when you go change your address at the DMV, you can update or change your voter registration right there when you get a new license. This common sense policy that President Biden enacted has helped millions of people register to vote over the past three years or so. People update their address all the time when they go interact with federal agencies. The Project 2025 wants to get rid of this entirely, calling it mission creep. They really don't like it. It really makes no sense. And the only outcome is that it means less people will have the ability to register easily and will likely not register and will be unable to vote in the next election. This actually leads me to one positive bill right here in Florida that I want to mention because I think it's really important to have these rallying points. And that is a bill called the Harry T. and Harriet V. Moore Florida Voting Rights Act. This bill would help fix many of the problems we have in our voting and elections process, including ensuring the state has full automatic voter registration and same-day registration. It also makes Election Day a holiday, which I really like. While we understand that it's an uphill battle to get pro-voter bills passed in places like Florida right now, movements start in rooms and Zoom rooms just like this. And we will not quit, no matter how long it takes, until every eligible Florida resident has easy access to fully participate in our elections. Thank you so much to Representative Escamani for being a top co-sponsor of that bill. We'll be counting on your leadership next year and into the future as long as it takes. I know you're on our side there. One other set of policies we can expect from the new Trump administration is the seeming obsession with striking all things deemed woke from law. Of course, this is another policy change ripped straight from the Florida playbook over the past few years. So Project 2025, it says right in the introduction, and I'm quoting, "The next conservative president must make the institutions of American civil society hard targets for woke culture warriors." Just think about that for a moment. The demand here is to turn the institutions of our country against Americans. And I have no doubt that Donald Trump and his acolytes would consider myself, maybe even most of all of us, as woke culture warriors, even though those terms have lost all meaning in the public political consciousness. It's just a weapon to other the good work that we're doing and the progress we have made over the past few years. There's actually numerous references throughout Project 2025 about their anti-DEIA agenda, and it's hard to say exactly where the new Trump administration starts and where they choose to focus their energy. In Florida, we've seen attacks on college campuses, in teacher training programs, in state administration, and in countless speeches and campaign ads. And I think we'll continue to see those types of attacks at the federal level, but also in the realms of labor, in energy policy, in healthcare agencies, and especially in federal grant programs. Anything they want to attack, they will use funding and hardline anti-DEA policy to bring state and local governments, agencies, and funding recipients in line with their dystopian worldview. So in closing, I agree that the sheer scope of the policy framework ahead of us is completely overwhelming, and that is by design. I am confident that we can and we will overcome all these challenges facing us, but only if we stick together, we reach out to our neighbors and make new friends and rely on the leadership of people who are leading the way for us, like Rep. Escamani and many, many others, especially in the Orlando area. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan Weber. And I'm actually going to go ahead and welcome our next three topics are super important. I know we're getting close to that time, but I'm going to ask if folks can stick with us for another 10 minutes after the 8:30 mark. I really appreciate it because we want to make sure you have the information you need and the organizations that are doing the work when it comes to not just civil rights, as Jonathan Weber just outlined at Southern Poverty Law Center, but also LGBTQ plus rights, which is a constant question I'm seeing in the chat right now, alongside immigrant rights. So just to stick to the agenda that we outlined, I'm actually first going to toss it over to John Harris Maurer at Equality Florida, and then Simone Chris at Southern Legal Counsel. And then we'll pivot over to Ariel. Feel free to keep your camera on just because we're all here. We might as well just, keep hustling the conversation. So John Harris, a champion legislature for Equality Florida and for LGBTQ plus rights. Please walk us through quickly, if you can, what you're watching and how people can help. And then for those that know, Simone Chris is a leading voice when it comes to transgender rights and equality. So I also want to, of course, give you the space. So please go ahead and take it away.
All right. Well, thank you, Rep. Escamani, and to you and your team so much for hosting this space. As mentioned, I'm John Harris Maurer, the Public Policy Director for Equality Florida. We focus on securing full equality for Florida's LGBTQ community. We've already heard from several speakers tonight, so I won't reiterate just where we are in terms of, a lot of understandable fear that is widely shared about Project 2025, but also this understanding that that is Florida Project 2024. And the LGBTQ community has absolutely seen a lot of these attacks already. And while it is really painful to see echoes of those now being talked about on the federal level, it also means that we have a roadmap and we know how to confront a lot of these issues. And we've been through some really incredibly difficult years, particularly the 2023 legislative session, a lot of administrative attacks. But, as Damaris alluded to, as Jonathan mentioned, we also have seen this playbook and we know better how to fight back against it. Last session in 2024, we saw 22 anti-LGBTQ bills filed in the legislature and helped defeat or neutralize 21 of those. So the attacks are real, and the fact that we've been able to stop some of them doesn't mean that harms from ones already perpetuated don't continue or that we won't face more harms again. But I wanted to touch very briefly on some of the main sort of issue areas that we're hearing questions about and concerns. So I'll cover a couple. I'm going to leave some for Simone as well, who, as Rep. Escamani mentioned, does tremendous, outstanding legal work challenging a lot of these attacks we've seen. But first, and I'll also have to drop some credit here, I'm paraphrasing a lot of brilliant suggestions and recommendations, thoughts from Amira Hazenbush with collaboration from Elizabeth Schwartz, who's a really prominent LGBTQ attorney in Florida, and several others. When resources go out after the call, I will provide a link to their information. But on marriage, we've heard concerns about the protection of folks' marriage. I would say overall, we know that marriage equality is the law of the land in the US. Already existing marriages are very likely to remain valid. We don't expect to see real challenges there. If there is an impact to the freedom to marry going forward, those changes likely aren't going to occur overnight. So it is certainly worth thinking through those things if you are not yet married, and also being mindful of all the responsibilities and privileges that come along with marriage as you consider that. Parentage, for those who may already be parenting as same-sex couples, as queer individuals, I would say that just having names listed on a birth certificate is not enough to fully protect your rights. Please do make sure that you've got a judgment to protect that parentage. Often that'll be an adoption or parentage judgment that is issued by a court. There are, again, lots of family law attorneys who can help with that process. And we don't want to see folks just relying on birth certificate names alone. In terms of fertility, obviously IVF is something that has become a really big part of the national conversation. It's something that's important for certain LGBTQ families that choose to pursue that. If you have genetic materials, including embryos that are frozen somewhere, this is an important time to be consulting with a fertility lawyer in that state where they are frozen to understand what the existing regulations are there. And in some cases, if anybody is advising that those materials be moved out of state due to risks, that is something that my family is looking at. It is a very real concern. In terms of estate planning, one of the last areas I want to touch on, if you don't have those sort of planning documents in place already, now is a really important time to be looking at your wills, trusts, guardianship, healthcare power of attorney to make sure that you have your desires specified in writing and on the record. We want to make sure, again, that LGBTQ folks in particular have the autonomy and the legal right to structure those things as they see fit and aren't just defaulting, excuse me, to existing assumptions in law that may not protect and work out in the way that folks would desire. So I am hearing a lot from folks about just how scary some of these possibilities are. We very much understand that. But it's also important to realize that the LGBTQ community has been through incredibly challenging and difficult periods before, and we've never been this prepared. We've never had the kind of resources we have now. We've never had the kind of allies that we have now. So if you do want to push back, we absolutely can use that help. There'll be a link that goes out after this to join us in the Capitol if you're able to. We have made the commitment that we are going to show up and fight in every room where they attack us. We are not going to let them do this in the dark. We will be there to tell our stories. We'll seize opportunities if they arise. We will build the record for legal challenges that Simone and other legal partners are so adamantly and courageously fighting. And we're going to continue to build our movement. So with that, I will pass it over to Simone.
Thank you so much, John Harris. Nice to be with you all. Thank you for being here tonight. My name is Simone Chris. I am a civil rights attorney in Florida. I'm the director of the Transgender Rights Initiative at Southern Legal Counsel. We are the small organization leading most of the anti-LGBTQ federal litigation that many people have never heard of. So I'm super pumped to talk to you all right now. So I just want to assure you all that it feels really daunting. It feels sometimes like we're alone and we're navigating this by ourselves in states like Florida and when things like this happen. And I just want you all to know that we are fighting so hard. So many people are out there fighting so hard for your rights, and nothing that happened on November 6th, nothing that could happen on any given day is going to change that. We are going to keep fighting. Nothing is going to change. I promise you that. We will keep bringing these cases and we will keep winning these cases, period, full stop. I was born and raised in Archer, Florida, in a small farm, and as a kid that grew up with no representation around me of other gay people, and now having the privilege of fighting for Florida's trans community, I can tell you I have a vested interest in this state, and we aren't going anywhere. Okay. I want to make clear, I think everybody on this call knows this, but elections have consequences, and we are facing right now in the federal courts the consequences from the 2016 election. And it's devastating, but what it actually means in practical application is we have judges that so at the trial court level, I just want to be very clear, we are winning. We are proving our cases. We are getting unprecedented orders that are having impacts nationwide. We have struck down the Medicaid ban on gender affirming care, the SB 254 and the boards of medicine rules banning care for minors and putting restrictions in place for adults, the pronoun ban, the don't say LGBTQ law, but all the things, right? We're winning. And we now have an appellate court, a federal judiciary of appellate judges, many of whom were appointed by Trump the first time around, who are willing to carve trans people out of the protections that we know exist based on sex discrimination. And that's terrifying. But it does not mean we lose. What it means is we now have to prove invidious discrimination is motivating these laws. And guess what? Thanks to people like Representative Escamani and all of you who show up at these hearings and these meetings and these behind the scenes things happening and ask the right questions, you are eliciting the most animus and bias that any human could spew. So many of these legislators made our case for us by saying horrific things about our community, and they wouldn't be saying those things on the record if people weren't asking the right questions and poking the bear and prodding them, right? So we have to keep showing up in these spaces, whether it's legislative committee hearings or board of medicine meetings or whatever it might be, administrative hearings. We have to show up, we have to ask the right questions, we have to get these things on the record, because that is how we win. So thank you for everybody that has taken the time to do that. And you might feel like, what does it matter if I wait for 4 hours to maybe give a 30-second comment? It matters. I'm quoting you in the pleadings that I'm writing in federal court, showing these people knew the harm it would cause. They knew it and they did it anyway. And it's critical that you all keep doing that you keep eliciting that vile rhetoric from these people, because we get to turn around and use it against them. Okay. I want to mention that the number one thing that I want everyone to do, and if you can go tell 5 trans people this, that you love, that you know, anywhere after this, I want you to update your passport. If you don't have a passport, I want you to get one. There is nothing more important that you can do. Right now, we are in a state where driver's licenses and birth certificates, they've stopped amending gender markers. We are filing lawsuits. We will challenge that. Hopefully we will win. But what you can do right now is secure access to legal authenticity. You can have a primary identification document, a federal document that says the correct gender marker before the next administration potentially removes your ability to do so. I'm hosting a name change clinic tomorrow night. We have 332 people registered. 332 people in one night are going to get everything they need for free to change their name and then to go update their passport and all their other documents. Please, please, please reach out to me if you need help doing this. I'm going to host as many name change clinics as humanly possible before January to make sure everybody has access to this. If you need access to medical care right now, the bans, went back into effect because the 11th Circuit issued a stay. It's complicated. You don't need to know all that. What I need you to know is do not forego medically necessary critical medical care. QueerMed is amazing. There are many resources like them, but QueerMed is an organization that you can get care out of state. They will prescribe to you. Doesn't matter that you live in a state with a ban. So please, please, please access care, whether you're a minor or an adult, it doesn't matter. Just noting, like, if you, I'm going to put my email in the chat. So please reach out to me if you have questions, if you want to volunteer, if you want to help our organization. We are tiny and mighty, 4 attorneys. But please, please get involved. Dispel misinformation, combat misinformation everywhere you see it, support our community. That is what we do. The LGBTQ community supports each other in ways that are so incredible and so unprecedented, and we need it now more than ever. But just don't lose hope, because we will keep fighting, we will keep winning, and the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice, but it does not bend on its own. All of us are making it bend. It is action, it is intent, it is community organizing, it is all of these things. So thank you guys, and I appreciate you listening to me tonight.
Thank you so much, Simone. There are some questions in the Q&A that I don't know if you have capacity to type responses to them, just because we are short on time. We're already, unfortunately, at that time. But there's also the chat, and we, of course, will let folks know how to be a part of your name change clinic, because I think that's super important. And I want to emphasize, from the mutual aid perspective, Simone operates a nonprofit with a very small and mighty team and needs money, needs resources. All the organizations here would benefit from resources. Many operate mutual aid funds as well. And so please, when we send that post-event email, check out these organizations, because they need those organized people and resources and ideas that we talked about earlier. I see questions coming to the chat about immigration. Just so you know, we only have 3 more topics, and we'll speed through them: immigrant rights, environmental policy, and then women and reproductive rights. And so, Ariel, I'm going to toss over to you from Florida Immigration Coalition to just give us obviously it's hard to stop immigration quickly, because the Trump administration has built their entire agenda on demonizing immigrants. And so I really want to thank you and everything Flick does in fighting back. And so love to hear your perspective on what folks can do to help and get involved. So I'll toss it over to you.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Ariel. I'm the organizing director with Florida Immigrant Coalition. Excuse me, I also did get sick toward the end of last week, so that should tell you how I'm handling things. But I will try to go over things as briefly as possible. So Flick is an organization that works for pro-immigrant policies and to serve the immigrant community. Right now, that looks like infrastructures that we can create to respond to immediate needs and also keep our eye on what's coming. We know we have a very short window of time to pass protections, from expanding legal pathways, TPS redesignations, expediting DACA renewals, and that's one of the things that Project 2025 is listed to do. So not only are we facing the threat of an uptick in deportations, but a threat of mass deportations, which is obviously the main concern right now. And a lot of the focus, not just with our community, but with our member organizations, is community defense and community protection tactics. We know that the way that Project 2025 has built out their mass deportations is restricting state and local funding, support for individuals and families and children seeking safety would be gutted. Lawyers and legal service providers would face increased barriers. Deportations would be fast-tracked, and immigration judges would have stricter rules that lead to unfair court decisions. So a big part of that is removing legal barriers. And so to that, we're looking at community defense tactics around one of the things that we hold are Protect the People clinics. For us, we knew that no matter what the results were, we live in a red state. We know who the targets are. And so for us, it really just increases the urgency and the need to invest in those structures. So Protect the People clinics are for folks to have time with lawyers to review their cases, but then also it's how are we preparing our communities in the face of deportation? Big picture is how are we not only creating networks that are supporting communities to respond in the threat of deportation, but also provide these resources as they will be restricted. So more Protect the People clinics and building out community cells to advocate for themselves as well. I'm trying to keep it brief. I know we're kind of late on time, but I do have my name and a form that you can complete if you'd like to volunteer. We're having a call on Monday, and that's the first step in our community defense. And we need as many people as possible, and we need representation everywhere, and we need our allies as well to speak up for us. So that's the first place that you can start and get plugged in. And I'll try to keep it short there and review the chat and respond to as many questions as I can.
You're amazing. And that call is, you said, on Monday of next week?
Monday the 18th at 5 p.m. Yes.
Perfect. And we will make sure we share that with everyone. And again, our goal tonight is to make sure folks are introduced to these amazing organizations who need you right now for you to get involved. And I saw a question in the chat earlier. I'm in a red part of the state. I don't feel like I can be as helpful, and I want you to know that for all these organizations, they are active everywhere. And especially for many of our farm worker communities, because they live in rural communities, they typically live in very conservative counties that are reliant on immigrant labor. And so please know that there are ways to get plugged in regardless of where you live in the state of Florida. So thank you, Ariel. You're the best. Really appreciate you. Okay, now we're going to shift gears to environmental policy, an issue near and dear to my heart. And we're with two fantastic champions for the environment and for clean energy. And so I'm going to toss it over to Scott and then Javi, and then our last speaker will be on reproductive rights and women's rights. And so Scott, go ahead and take it away.
Hey guys, for those of y'all who don't know me, my name's Scott Thomason. I am a lawyer for the solar industry and other clean energy industries. I'm a consultant for nonprofit foundations and a couple dozen environmental and equity groups here in Florida. And I'm also a consultant for local governments on their sustainability and 100% goals. As we shift out of the Biden administration, we're expecting to see some things like rollback of EPA regulations, especially on car emissions, power plant emissions. But the big priority everyone is worried about and working really hard right now to get out the door are the historic federal funding programs that were passed as part of the IRA in 2022, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the IIJA, which is also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, before that. And we're talking about $1.5 trillion worth of funding and tax credits. Florida alone has about $1 billion at the state level almost. We've got 450 million for efficiency rebates, 150 million for low-income solar program, and about 200 million for EV infrastructure, all at different levels of risk, but most of those have already been received. What we're really looking at is trying to get all that stuff nailed down so it can't be clawed back. The same way a couple other speakers have talked about the race to get things done and get things on paper. We're trying to get money out the door. So a lot of what we're focused on in that arena is taking the message to Republicans that these investments are not partisan, and that the clean energy investments that have been made around the country and the jobs that have been created and the economic activity that's been stimulated are not just Democratic jobs. They're in red states. Florida has not benefited as much because the state has sat on the bench for a lot of the programs. But if you go up to Georgia or North Carolina, you'll see, huge new factories being built for batteries and electric vehicles and solar panels, with thousands of new jobs. So the focus there is for everyone to educate Republicans, make sure they feel some investment in these local projects in their district and feel that there's a reason to protect them other than just climate. Which of course was the big reason for doing a lot of it, but is not a big reason for Republicans to keep it. On the other front, one thing we've seen in Florida, a number of speakers have talked about Project 2025. It's been the same for energy. DeSantis in particular has latched on to ESG as a boogeyman in our space, the same way he has for DEI and other things, and other woke things that he's gone after in other spaces. Last session, we saw a preemption of local governments that would ban them from considering climate and environment in their transportation planning. And we, of course, saw they passed a ban on wind energy, even though no one's looking to build wind energy in Florida. We're expecting a lot more of that, again, at the state level because DeSantis likes it, but it's also woven into Project 2025 in a number of places. So we'll be seeing more of that. It's been having a chilling effect on local governments who have 100% goals and sustainability goals. We've got to keep the pressure on them. I know Javier is going to talk from Sierra Club. They've been a leading organization on that, continue to be. And the other thing I'd stress, that local engagement is really important. We're seeing in Orlando right now, Orlando OUC, the city's utility, has an anti-solar proposal that they've admitted privately. One reason they're doing it is they feel pressured by the state political environment and the DeSantis taking over the utility in Gainesville. But the good news from Gainesville is they just passed a referendum this election to take back that utility. So I'm going to provide a link for a rally in Orlando on December 4th for OUC solar policy that I think is a great starting point to reset the conversation on clean energy in Florida and do it at a level where you can really make an impact. But Javier can talk to that a lot better than I can for Sierra Club.
Thanks so much, Scott. Javier, it's all you.
Thanks, Representative Escamani. My name is Javier Estevez, and I am Sierra Club Florida's political director. And we are the Florida chapter of Sierra Club National, which is the oldest and largest environmental advocacy organization in the country. And our national team is ready. We've been through this before, back in 2016. One of the top priorities of the first Trump administration is going to be this one, is rolling back on any environmental regulations that the previous administrations did. Just today on Fox News, Representative Zeldin, former Representative Zeldin, which is the EPA nominee, said on day one, in the first 100 days, we will roll back regulations that are forcing businesses to struggle. So we know what they're doing. We know where they're going. And on top of that, it's also pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement. But like I said, we've been here before. We're going to continue fighting back against what's going to be obviously the renewed focus on propping up oil and gas companies. And in the first Trump administration, Sierra Club National had many victories, both federally and in the states, through the courts, throughout the whole Trump administration. And thanks to our Beyond Coal campaign, even during that Trump administration, the switch from coal to clean energy continued going. But I mean, we're not scared. We've been here before. We're an environmental organization in the state of Florida. We are used to the fight. We show up every single day. So I'm asking everybody, if you're interested, if you are worried about the environment, if you're worried about the future of our state and our country and making sure that your kids have clean drinking water and access to clean air, then join us. Go to sierraclub.org/Florida. We have groups all throughout the state. We are not just a national state chapter. We have local groups that are fighting in their local municipalities and in their local cities to make sure that we are hitting the markers that we need to meet. We're going to continue fighting against attacks against our environment and clean energy. We're going to continue to push local cities and municipalities to take those funds that Scott talked about from the IRA and all the other great legislation that the Biden administration passed for as long as possible, as long as we have those funds available. We're going to continue to push for changes in state regulations to switch from oil and gas to clean energy. We're going to continue protecting our state parks from over development. And we're going to continue our campaigns that are ongoing in the state to stop sugar burning, overdevelopment, and protect our endangered species and our conservation lands. But, you know, it's a scary time. We kind of know where they're going, but we're still waiting for a surprise because, you know, Trump is anything but one person to plan ahead. But we're ready for this fight, and I'm looking forward to everybody being in this fight with us.
Thank you, Javier. Sierra Club has been such a great partner in the legislature too, and fighting for all these issues. And so I do want to stress that I think the environment is one of those topics where we can build bridges very easily with folks of different political backgrounds. And Sierra Club, and I know Scott does that all of the time in the legislature here in Florida. And so we need to also champion these issues and defend our planet. I'm very worried about our inability to address extreme weather patterns, rising sea levels, and even just the cost of energy, because we forget that when we invest in clean energy and energy efficiency, yes, is good for the planet, but it also saves us money. So I do think how we preserve some of these programs is to also talk about them differently. And I would actually argue for a lot of these issues, we have to be stronger communicators on them. So I really appreciate y'all for being a part of this. All right, y'all, thanks for sticking with us. Personally, I saved, I think, one of the most important topics and one of my favorite topics for last, and that is reproductive rights and women's equality. And I'm joined by one of my most incredible friends and advocates and fighters in this work, who is a key voice in the Yes on 4 initiative here in Florida with the ACLU, and that is Keisha Mulfort. And so, Keisha, I'm going to toss it to you as not just a voice in this work as a mom and as a Black woman yourself, but also as a senior policy leader for communications at ACLU Florida. And so walk us through what you're watching, what you are concerned about, and how folks can get plugged in. And then I can add some other state perspectives to the conversation as well. So I'll toss it over to you.
Thank you so much, Anna, and thank you everyone for being here tonight for this important conversation. I have my little one here, like right in front of me. She doesn't realize it's her bedtime because mommy's on the computer, but it just goes to show like the multifaceted nature of like what we just witnessed when it came to Amendment 4. I first want to make space for the fact that, you know, we are still reeling and dealing with the fact that over 6 million Floridians across party lines agree that Florida's restrictive abortion ban and near total abortion ban has to go. And yet we were unable to enshrine it in our Constitution, and that's a problem. And one of the things that we are working on at the ACLU is not just focusing on the fact that there was like close to a supermajority, right? But the fact that there's so much work to be done. And so we're looking at the different legislative possibilities that we have before us. We know that particularly in communities of colors and Black women specifically, women are going to die as a result of this ban. And I even went to my doctor recently as Monday, and we talked about it, and just talking with him and what he's seeing. It is a reality for us. And because it is a reality, we cannot allow the fact that we were unsuccessful on the ballot to deter us. We have to make sure that we're still all hands on deck, because our children, the women coming after us, the people who will be here when we are long gone, they need us in this fight. And so understanding that there is the president-elect, and there are people in this state who are making it their business to prevent us from getting the necessary health care that we need. We need every single person on this call to ensure that you are involved in this fight. We need you to get educated on the things that we're seeing when it comes to maternal health. We need you to tell the stories of Anya Cook. Tell the stories of Deborah Dorbert. Tell the stories of Caroline and the women that you know, with their permission, who have gone through the worst moments of their lives and almost died. The infant mortality rate in Florida, y'all, has risen since this abortion ban has come into play, okay? So we're not just talking about women's lives, but we're also talking about what women have to go through and the ordeal that their families have to go through once that baby is no longer here with them. And so these are all things that we have to make sure that we are on the front lines of, and that we are still making a priority. So I know we don't have a whole lot of time. I literally could talk about this all night, but it is extremely important for us to remember that we have to keep these conversations going. We have to hold people accountable, and please join the ACLU. The ACLU of Florida's website is aclufl.org. Subscribe to our newsletters, be on the lookout. We'll have pages completely dedicated to what this abortion fight means for the ACLU moving forward. So again, we did not lose. We did not lose in the grand scheme of things, because we were able to show the government and show Florida that more than 6 million residents support abortion rights in Florida, and we just need to make sure that we continue on in that messaging and pushing it in the way that we can be successful.
Thank you, Keisha. I really appreciate you, especially there's been a lot of questions in the chat about Amendment 4, about trying to reduce that threshold to 50% +1 versus 60%. I do want to remind folks that the reason why Florida has a 60% threshold is because in 2006, corporations worked with the legislature to put on the ballot a question before the voters to increase the threshold to 60%, because corporations in Florida didn't want everyday people to amend the Constitution on economic issues like minimum wage changes. And that ballot initiative passed with 57%. So to increase the threshold to 60% only got 57%. I know there is a desire to try to bring it back down to 50, but I do speculate, I haven't seen polling on this, but I think that's a hard issue to get to 60%, even harder than reproductive rights, because the opposition would basically say, do you want to make it easier to amend a state constitution? And I feel like that's a hard argument to make, because a constitution is a document that many people would hold in high regard. But needless to say, all those issues are being explored. Personally, I want to try Amendment 4 again. I think 57% is too close not to try again. And we've learned lessons from the first initiative. And so I'm very hopeful to do it again. I want to highlight quickly as, oh, the baby's here. We love it. This is who we're fighting for, y'all. This is who we're fighting for. It's awesome to see Quinn in the space. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again to wrap up with next steps. But as I have Keisha with us, I do want to remind folks that Trump is attempting to avoid the conversation of abortion. But his vice president has already openly said that he would support a total abortion ban. We know there are Republican lawmakers who have said the same thing. So we need to be ready to fight against a national abortion ban. I also want to emphasize the concerns of the defunding of programs that focus on comprehensive sexual health education, attacks on contraception, and of course, attacks on IVF. There are amazing organizations, in addition to ACLU, like Planned Parenthood, Southern Birth Justice Network, that are leading the charge and fighting back against a lot of these congressional fights. And I also want to uplift the importance of abortion funds at this time. We have abortion funds that are raising private dollars to support women in need. People who need access to abortion can reach out to an abortion fund for financial resources, for travel, for childcare, and for the cost of the service itself. Right now in Florida, with a 6-week abortion ban, the closest option is going to be North Carolina for a service at 12 weeks, and then Virginia if you are beyond that period. And of course, that type of travel for many families is inaccessible. So abortion funds like Florida Access Network, like Tampa Bay Abortion Fund, like ARC of Southeast, and others are very important organizations, and we will be sure to share those links with you in the chat and of course via email after this session is over. So I have some very quick action items to share, and for the 500 some people who've stuck around to 9 o'clock, you are rock stars, and thank you for being a part of this conversation. So for next steps, we're going to email you all the links and organizations and issues we talked about so that you can pick and choose where your passions are and where you want to implement your time. Of course, I mentioned in the Q&A to folks, and we answered almost every question. So I do appreciate folks that are asking questions in the chat. Voter registration numbers in Florida are not good. One reason why we lost Florida was low Democratic turnout. There never was a day during early vote where we saw high Democratic turnout statewide. In Orange County, the last weekend of early vote, we saw really strong turnout. But statewide, there never was this dramatic peak of Democratic voters. So not only do we have to work to get out people to vote, and again, knowledge is power. So by talking to people about these issues, you help them realize why their vote matters. A lot of people are apathetic and don't think their vote counts. And by empowering, educating them on how these issues impact their life, we can change that dynamic. But we also need to register more people to vote. And 3 years ago, I did launch a voter registration organization. We are one of the only politically focused voter registration organizations that carries a partisan lens, because we're trying to focus registration on those who align with our values. It's called People Power for Florida. Please check us out. I'll also email this link as well. And we focus heavily on activating younger people to care. And so you can join us in registering voters as well. We're going to have future trainings. I already saw a request in the chat for us to focus on public education, do a whole 1 hour just on public education. Very happy to do that post this event. If there are other issues you want us to focus on, please let me know. And of course, at Team Anna, we have a weekly volunteer newsletter that also includes action items for legislative actions to take. And you can sign up at honorforflorida.com/volunteer. I also want to encourage folks to be thoughtful for where you spend your money. I see a lot of folks leaving Twitter. That I feel like that's a good thing. Obviously, it's hard for me to do that as an elected official, but we need to spend our money and spend our time in acts of protest. And so really encourage folks to shop at small businesses, avoid some of these companies and CEOs that are clearly backing an extreme agenda for their own benefit, their own profits. And let's be critical about the people we elect and ensure they're also championing those worker issues. I want to flag important Florida dates, and these are the dates of legislative session and committee weeks, because the fights in DC are going to need our attention. We can't forget about Florida, and Florida will continue to have a supermajority Republican legislature that will be empowered by the Trump agenda. So we have to hold the line at the state level as well. So these are the dates of when we'll be in committee weeks, and then session starts in March. A lot of folks have asked about when is Trump going to put his tariffs into place, and when will nominations happen if they happen? We don't have those dates yet. The congressional calendar has not been announced yet. Of course, this stuff is moving fast, so follow us online. We will keep you posted, but we don't have those dates yet. I've seen questions in the chat too about marches, and I alluded to this earlier. I do suspect there'll be activities approaching the inauguration on the ground in your community. Please stay tuned for those details. If you want to get involved in those details, we can make those connections for you. But we're a 1 week out from the election. So there's a lot of planning and organizing and discussions happening. And so please know that things are in motion, but they do take time to facilitate safely and effectively. So in the interim, we want you to get involved with the organizations that we talked about tonight. With that said, I again just want to thank everyone for being in this space. Thank you to all of our thoughtful, amazing speakers. We organized this event quickly, and no one said no to showing up and helping to unpack the issues they care about and the work that they need help with and how you can get plugged into it. And so I really appreciate everyone taking the time to be part of this conversation. We are not alone. And I want you to remember that, because I know it feels really scary and uncertain especially for groups who are directly impacted by these policies. But I want you to know that you are not alone, that there is infrastructure in place in Florida that isn't going anywhere, that has been doing this work for a long time and needs your help now more than ever. So if you don't consider yourself to be an activist, if you've never been politically engaged, this is the time, right? And even if you just have an hour to give or one activity a month, whatever it is needed, it is valued, and we need you right now. And so please continue to stay connected with us, follow through with the organizations that we provide to you, and let's continue to build power long term, because again, change doesn't happen with a quick burst of energy or enthusiasm. Change only happens with a consistent persistence for something greater than ourselves. And I didn't win my first election or my most recent election because I showed up once a year, right? It's because we're organizing 24/7, meeting people where they're at, building trust with communities, and delivering results. And these are organizations that can help us do that. We are the leaders who can do that. And I just ask you to maintain that focus, maintain that passion and that drive for something greater than ourselves, to rebuild our democracy, to rebuild a Florida that cares about everyone. And of course, to win back people that we lost to this extremism, because I do believe in the power of evolution. People do change. We have to give them a reason to evolve. And a part of that is working at the grassroots level with these organizations, not only to affect policy change, but to win back hearts and minds. And so I thank everyone for being a part of this. Please keep up the faith and know that we're here right alongside you. Have a beautiful night. Be safe, stay strong, stay tuned for the email from us, and we will see everyone very soon. Thank you so much, y'all. Have a great night. Thanks again to our speakers.
Thank you.